Hey guys, BuildZoid here, and today we're going to be doing some memory overclocking for benchmarking purposes on the EVGA X299 Micro2 motherboard. I've already done a PCB breakdown of this board. It's up on the Gamers Nexus channel, so if you want to check that out, you can go over there. The short version of it is we have a 10-phase VRM here using an IR35201, then 3599 doublers, and then International Rectifier 3556 power stages. So those are 50 amp power stages. It's a 10 phase. We have a pretty reasonable heatsink. It has a fan. It's got a bunch of surface area. It's not had any issues so far in my testing. Of course, I've not run any intensive workloads, so that'll be a separate video. Today we're just going to be doing some memory overclocking for benchmarking purposes because, I can't help myself. I see a motherboard with 1 DIMM per memory channel, and I just think, I wonder if this clocks memory good. So that's what we're going to do today. And we're going to be benchmarking with Geekbench 3 here. And we're going to be using Geekbench 3 because it has a memory test. It's relatively memory heavy. It's also on Windows 10, it's also more consistent than SuperPi, and it doesn't take anywhere near as long. So that's why we're going to be benchmarking with this. Right now the system is completely stock, and we are going to go through the entire BIOS and just set everything up. But we're really going to focus more on the memory. So right now, we're bone stock, CPU's stock. We are on a 7940X. The 7940X is delidded, but it is not on liquid metal quite yet. So it is currently completely uncoolable above sort of 1.165 volts, which is what we're going to end up running it on. Anyway, let's just run the benchmarks. So cool thing about Geekbench 3 is it's a bunch of little tests sort of put together, and there's basically 2 critical points in the benchmark. So this part here, very easy, no big deal. Also, you may notice that the postcode on this motherboard actually works as a temperature readout. This is accurate. It works just fine. It uses the on-die temperature sensors. But anyway, here we're going to be hitting one of the first critical points for this benchmark, which is Dijkstra, which should be any moment now. It's taking a bit longer than what I'm used to because we're at stock. Yeah, so Dijkstra. And this test is really, really memory heavy. It's not actually that hot, as you may notice, right? It's not very hot, but it is very memory intensive. And so if your memory is unstable, this thing will go down very, very quickly. But once you pass Dijkstra, it's pretty much smooth sailing until we get to a test called DFFT, and that one's really CPU heavy. So that's basically the hottest test. SSFT, well, there's SFFT and DFFT, and those are basically the hottest tests in the entire thing. And those are the other part of the benchmark that tends to cause crashing. And there we go, DFFT, highest temperature so far. And then we get some more multi-threaded tests, and they're also pretty hot, but they're not quite as problematic. Probably because you'll crash on, it's quite possible that all the tests after DFFT are still equally heavy. It's just you won't get to them if you're not stable enough to pass DFFT in the first place. So here we have our score. We have a multi-core overall score, so this is actually what goes up on this is the big one for hardware bot rankings. And it is composed, of course, of CPU frequency, mesh frequency, and there's a memory score. And we're going to be focusing on that today, and it does affect your overall score. So, having a good memory score does help your multi-core score overall, so that's why it's worth worrying about. So, yeah, that's our first baseline score. We're just going to take a screenshot of that so we can compare against it later. And now what we're going to do is we're going to do the first step of benching, any benchmarking with Samsung BDI. If you're actually being competitive, you're going to want to set maximum memory. So what you go to is, what I typed in was msconfig, which will get you to system configuration. Then you go to the boot menu, and you go advanced options, and in the advanced options, you're going to enable maximum memory. Now, this, you would think it's in megabytes. It doesn't actually really work that well. So right now, we have the system is capable, nope, we want performance. You can see we have, oops, what did I do? There, you can see we have 31.7 gigabytes of memory available. We don't want to have this much memory accessible. For some reason, with Samsung BDI, if you reduce the amount of memory that Windows can access, it massively increases your stability, and that means you can run much, much higher clocks and much tighter timings than you normally would be able to if you actually have the entire, all of your memory accessible. So for that reason, we're going to punch in 6,000 in here. But you might think this equates to 6,000 megabytes, but in reality, on X299, this translates to about 3.1 gigabytes of usable RAM. So we're going to restart. And this is just one of the, like, I don't know what pattern there is to it. I basically just trial and error it. One thing you need to keep in mind when setting your maximum values is that if you restrict your system's accessible memory too much, you're not going to be able to run the benchmark because it's not going to fit into your available RAM. So, you know, there is such a thing as going too far. But if you're going for like maximum memory frequency or something, you know, where you don't actually care about running any real workloads, you can push the maximum value really, really low. Like you can get away with like 1.5 gigabytes of RAM or even 1 gig of RAM. If you strip down your operating system, you can obviously go even lower because there's going to be less background stuff running. So, yeah, but for just here, we're going to go with 6 gigs. Maximum for Geekbench, you can sort of, like, minimum value you can probably go to is around 2.6 gigabytes. But this is going to be good enough for demonstration purposes here, so we're just going to go with 6,000 megabytes, apply that, and shut down and restart. And that's the first step of really any Samsung BDI benchmarking. For other memory ICs like EDI and DDI, this is not actually necessary to do. They don't have this property. Though I think on DDR3 platforms there are some other chips which behave the same. But with DDR4, it's as far as I'm aware, it's only BDI. Then again, I don't really test that much RAM, so keep that in mind. Like, I'm not the most experienced RAM overclocker out there, by far. Anyway, so now we're in the BIOS. And we're going to start with just setting up a basic CPU overclock. So we're going to go from CPU multiplier control to just ratio limit. This is just because I'm lazy. The per core controls work just fine. You can set per core ratios, but I cannot be, it's going to take forever. So we're just going to go with ratio limit. We're going to lock it at 45. For uncore, we're going to go to 32, 0, 0 on our offsets. I don't actually think, I'm not sure Geekbench actually uses AVX. Either way, we're going to set them to 0 because we're like worst case scenario, we're going to need to get better cooling, right? That's the way to deal with that. Oh, we can't cool the AVX instructions, get a bigger cooler. Now, next thing we do, extreme overclocking mode. We enable this because otherwise, if you leave it disabled, we're not going to have enough memory voltage range. As you can see, I just punched in 2 and I got 1.6. So if we go to enabled and we punch in 2, we actually get 2. But there's a little quirk with the memory voltage on this motherboard, so we're not actually going to run 2. We're going to just go to 1.85, and I'll show you what's up with that right after we get through the rest of the CPU settings right here. So next we have the CPU VIN. So let's just bring it up a bit. CPU VIN is the voltage fed into the integrated voltage regulator of a Skylake X CPU. So Skylake X basically has an integrated voltage regulator that takes care of things like VCore, VMesh, uncore voltage offset, and there's some other sub-voltages that you don't really need to worry about, and they're all generated on die, well, on package. They're not actually really done on die. Like the regulator's active components are on the die, but the passive components of the regulator are actually on the CPU package. So anyway, this is the voltage that feeds that. And we're going to be running that at just straight 2 volts. And the reason why we're going to be setting it to 2 volts is this is actually a perfectly safe voltage level for that to be at. And the other thing is if you set it too low, your CPU will power throttle. And it won't actually like show up in software that your frequency is dropping or anything like that. What happens is just your scores suck for no apparent reason. Your CPU will also run cooler. Like if you run, say, the effect is most noticeable if you're running like below 1.7 volts on your VIN. So really, just running low VIN is not a good idea in general. So just set it to 2 volts, or 1.95 is another voltage that I run a lot. Really, somewhere around that 2 volts range. You can max out at around 2.1. You don't really want to go past that. And that is even true for you know, extreme overclocking, where you wouldn't really push the VCC in. You wouldn't exceed, say, 2.4 volts or 2.3 volts. There's just no reason to do that. And also, I think apparently the CPUs straight up die if you push the VCC in too high. But I'm not sure where the actual level is right now. But basically, if you just stay below, if you stay sort of below 2.1, you're going to be just fine. So we're just going to go with 2 because we don't need more than that. For vCore, we're going to do, well, you could use adaptive. I like to use override because I'm lazy. Adaptive would obviously give us, and that's not going to work. Adaptive obviously gives you better power savings. Override is more convenient to work with. vMesh, we're going to set override. And also, so for vCore voltage, maximum safe voltage for the silicon is roughly like 1.4 volts, assuming you could cool it. The problem is, you can't. It is not, like, if you were doing daily, there is no way in hell you're going to cool a Skylake X CPU at 1.4 volts unless you're talking about, like, chilled water and, yeah, like, various extreme cooling methods, assuming you have a CPU with, like, 12 cores and up, right? Because, obviously, if you have less cores, there's going to be less heat. It's going to be easier to cool, but if you have, like, a 14 core like I have, or a 16 or an 18, you're not going to be able to cool much more than, say, 1.25, 1.3 volts. So that's pretty neat that you don't need to really worry about the voltage because it's going to be uncoolable. Even on liquid nitrogen, you don't really exceed 1.55 volts for benchmarking just because the CPUs get so damn hot that you actually lose frequency if you push the voltage too high. And here we're just going to run 1.165 because, as I said, we're on thermal paste under the IHS, so I'm really cooling limited. We're also on an AIO, so this just, you know, we can't actually run a ton of voltage into it. Now, mesh, we're going to go to 1.3 volts. Again, same maximum limit, you know, 1.4 volts is the theoretical maximum. It's just not very practical to go that far, so I'll just run 1.3 volts on that. In Droop, we're going to disable that. So EVGA doesn't have a setting labeled load line calibration just because, like, I'm just going to blame this on EVGA not having made, like, proper motherboards for, like, several years until very recently. Okay, so the new boards they're putting out, pretty good, but there's, like, some very obvious issue, like, things that EVGA needs to catch up on. And the lack of proper load line calibration settings is one of them. So basically your options are Intel spec, and Intel spec for Skylake X is god-awful. By Intel spec, once your VRM is pushing about 200 amps output, which is doable, that's only about at VCC in of 2 volts, that's only 400 watts. These CPUs regularly hit like 450, 500 watts even, if you push the core voltage high enough. But yeah, if you have the VCC in, if you have the VDroop enabled, you're going to be losing something like 230 millivolts by the time you get to 200 amps output. And that's Intel spec. That's like as Intel intended it. Now, the problem with that is, if your VCC in starts dropping, you're going to eventually run into that throttling issue, so you want to disable that because it's just going to make your performance suck. So we're going to run it disabled. Obviously, disabled is not ideal. You generally, like, VDroop exists to compensate in the physical inability of voltage regulators to just do certain things. It's just not physically possible for a voltage regulator to respond instantly, so some amount of VDroop would be good, but when your option is tons and tons of VDroop to the point of it being, like, problematic and just no VDroop whatsoever, you go no VDroop, okay? Like, this is the better of the two options here, so we're just going to disable that. VSA, we don't have to, like, this voltage does literally nothing on Skylake X. As far as I know, it's not even necessarily connected to much of anything important. So we're just going to run that at 1 volt. It doesn't actually do anything, in my experience. Like, I've messed around with that voltage a lot. It has no impact on memory overclocking. So we're just going to run it at 1 volt because, yeah, again, it just doesn't make a difference. I guess we could leave it on auto. It wouldn't make a difference, but just the thing I do is set it to 1. VCCIO, we're going to go to 1.3 volts. VCCIO directly affects your mesh overclocking capabilities, so more VCCIO gives you more mesh overclocking range. Thing is, you don't really want to push VCCIO above 1.35 volts, okay? It's basically just memory controllers are kind of fragile, and memory systems in general are kind of fragile. VCCIO is part of that. So it has slightly less voltage tolerance than the rest of the chip. Now for uncore voltage offset, this is where things get interesting. So this voltage dictates your memory overclocking capabilities. And if you set it too high, your memory overclocking gets worse. If you set it too low, your memory overclocking gets worse. Generally speaking, a range I like to run in is between 400 and 500 millivolts on that, which 500 millivolts obviously gives you about 1.4 volts after the offset, which is definitely on the high end. I wouldn't necessarily run that daily, but for benchmarking purposes, it's fine. We're just going to go with 480 just because that's the voltage I've been testing with so far, and that's been working really well for me. I've tried bumping it up to like 520 as well. Didn't really see any benefit. Lower voltages did have some issues with the higher frequencies that we're going to be running. Now for PCH, we're going to set that to, well, we can just set it to stock, which is 1.02 volts. And we just manually set everything so that we know what the voltages are. And then we have the PLL trim offset and the MC PLL trim offset. I don't know what exactly these do. I have tried tweaking them up and down. They kind of seem to sometimes maybe help with higher memory ratios, but Skylake X just kind of sucks at high memory frequencies anyway, so yeah, I'm honestly, like, if you just leave them at +0, you're going to be fine. So yeah, I'm definitely, I will be asking EVGA, like, for, well, somebody to clarify what exactly these control on the CPU, but as far as I can tell, if you just leave them on the stock setting, you're not going to have a problem. So that's what we're going to leave those on. Now then, memory. So we're not going to do any memory overclocking quite yet. We need to address one of the issues with this motherboard, which is the voltage control. So we're going to start off at like 1.5 volts, and yes, you can actually set per channel voltage levels. It's just that the channel B tracks channel, I mean, because basically what's going on is you have one voltage regulator for this set of memory sticks, you have the other voltage regulator for this set of memory sticks. So one of them follows the other, right? So if I set there. So if I set this to 1.6, right, it's independent, but if you set this one to 1.7, it changes both. So that's just something to keep in mind. EVGA, you know, their color coding for the voltages is a bit generous. I really don't consider 1.6 volts okay. Anyway, so the thing we need to address about the memory voltage is let's just set 1.5 volts for now. Let's grab my multimeter and save configuration and reset. I said reset. There. Must have hit the wrong button. Here we have the multimeter, and you can't see anything because there's glare. We're just going to get into the BIOS, and so right now the board is reading out like 1.49, 1.48 volts, right? Which is actually accurate. So right now the voltage readout in software is functional. And if I can just get the probe onto that. This is rather awkward. That voltage regulator is really not in an easy to probe position. There we go. So yeah, and we can see that we're getting about 1.5. So we can agree that the software is not that far off. Obviously my measurement method is not ideal. My ground probe is in the middle of the motherboard instead of across the legs of the capacitor on the output. So I'm going to have slightly higher voltage than the software here. And if we check the other voltage regulator, reach around 4. This one's actually easier to stab. That one is also reading the same thing. So that's all fine and good. But if we start bumping up the voltage, so let's say we go to like 1.8 volts, which is perfectly fine for air cooling. Well, it's not fine for like daily usage, but for benchmarking, like short-term benchmarking, doesn't cause issues. I've run these sticks on like 2 volts for quite a lot of hours. I've not yet noticed any degradation, but there's no, like, I'm not aware of any foolproof, you know, long-term reliability data for very high voltages on DDR4. And the manufacturers themselves only spec the memory ICs to 1.5 volts. So that's why the general recommendation for daily is 1.5 volts, because the manufacturers actually test up to that voltage. That doesn't mean that's the absolute maximum. It's just like that's the only thing anybody's actually properly tested. And you know, without more data, it's really hard to say that, you know, 1.8 volts would be safe. It probably isn't, because I have heard stories of like Samsung B-die memory kits randomly dying above, you know, certain voltage levels, though those could have also just been defective in the first place, so it's hard to say. Anyway, if we measure now, we're still, you know, getting what we expect. We're getting the 1.8 volts. The software is a little bit low again, but that's just, you know, different measurement methods and all that kind of thing. If we probe that one, we get 1.8 volts again. So that's all good. But here comes the issue with this motherboard. So if we set to 1.85, and this is like the big difference between this and the dark. Because everything in the BIOS so far is identical for both this board and the X299 dark. It's just this board has this issue that the dark doesn't have. So now we're going to get into the BIOS, and we've set 1.85 volts, right? And the BIOS is reading 1.83 and 1.82, so we're still, you know, it's similar amount of margin of error as before. If we probe, we get, you know, 1.84. So roughly what we'd expect to see. If we measure on the other side, we get 1.84. So, okay, so obviously we're starting to lose some voltage here. But the problem is, if we set both of those to 2 volts, we don't actually get 2 volts, which is a bit of a problem. Now, the X299 dark doesn't have this issue, but this board seems to have a, like, voltage cap on the side of the voltage regulator that the BIOS doesn't respect. So basically, we can see that our software voltage readings are still about 1.835, 1.823, and our physical voltage level is still 1.84. So that is kind of a problem, because the board literally is incapable of setting more than, like, okay, well, let's just probe the other one because that one's easier. But you get the idea, right? Like, this is a problem, because if you really want to push your B-die, a lot of Samsung B-die will scale to like 2 volts, 2.1 volts, even higher in some cases. Yeah, this board does not allow you to set more than 1.84 volts. It just doesn't go any higher than that. The X299 dark can go as high as you like there's no issue with this. This board just seems to have a software restriction on the side of the voltage controllers that the BIOS just kind of seems to forget about. So you can't actually set the board to 2 volts, even if you punch in 2 volts in the BIOS. So that is rather unfortunate, but it's not a huge deal because we can still actually overclock quite well. It's just that because of this difference in voltage range, this board does clock memory a bit worse than quite a bit worse than the X299 dark, depending on your memory kit. Because as I said, some kits will scale all the way to like 2.1 volts, and it is physically impossible to set more than 1.84 on this board. So yeah, that is an issue. You can volt mod it. There is a data sheet for the chip controlling the vCore. I'm gonna try ask EVGA to maybe put out a BIOS that like fixes this, because I think this is kind of I don't think this is really intentional. To me, it at least seems like a bug. Obviously, to most users, like, the thing is, EVGA does not expect this motherboard to be used for extreme overclocking, of course, because it's micro ATX. They have an extreme overclocking board. It's called the dark, right? So it makes sense that this doesn't have the full voltage range, but like either patch the BIOS to not let you set 2 volts, or patch the voltage controllers to actually output 2 volts. Like, one of the two, right? Like, don't, like, because right now it's just kind of annoying, in my opinion, that like you can punch in way more voltage than you'll actually get. Anyway, now we're going to put the memory to manual, and we're going to go to 4,000, well, we could go to 4,000, we could also go to 3,800, but to start out, since, we're going to start with some baseline settings, we're going to go to 3,600, and we're going to do 1.85, I mean, it's going to end up at 1.84 anyway, but we're just going to punch in 1.85, and we're going to start at 12, 12, 12, 12, 26. So this is a cool difference between X299 and like mainstream Intel. You can actually set all of your timings separately. So unlike mainstream Intel, you can set cast latency, you can set TRCD and TRP are tied together, so like they set to the same thing. So if I have like what I have right here, which is 12, 12, 11, 26, this doesn't work on mainstream Intel. On mainstream Intel, this would be 12, 12, 12, 26, right? It would just be all 12. That 11 right there would either cause the system to not boot or it wouldn't apply. So depending on what motherboard you're using. So that's one difference with X299, because you can run things like 13, 12, 11, or like you have more flexibility with setting up your timings because you just get more control there. So we're just going to start with 12, 12, 12 though, because this is like an easy thing to run. TRAS is also a bit different here than on mainstream Intel. On mainstream Intel, you can't really set that timing below 28 as far as I'm aware. On X299, you can just set it all the way to the ground. Like you can set it as low as your memory chips will allow you to. So yeah, that's pretty neat. TRRDS and TRRDL work as usual. We're going to start off with 4, 6. This will work, okay? Like these are just values that like I've tested with these memory sticks, and like this is basically what's been tested and known good for Samsung VDI when you're benching it. So at these voltages and this frequency, this will all work. TRP, we're going to start with 11 there. We can eventually work that down. TFall, we're going to go to 16. You can technically set your TFall to like lower than 16. The thing is, TFall is going to be at minimum 4 times your TRRDS value. So if your TRRDS is 4 and your TFall is 12, ultimately the motherboard's just not going to respect that setting of 12. Right? If you try to set it to 12, it's just not going to do anything. It's not going to give you any performance gain. It's going to end up being 16. So that's worth noting. So yeah, but we're just going to set it to 16 here. TCWL, a good rule of thumb for TCWL is to just set it to your TCL -1. So we're going to run 11 there. And we can eventually work that lower. You can work it all the way down to like 9 or 8, depending on how lucky you are with your memory sticks. I generally go down to 9. I don't think I've actually tested if 8 works at all. Command rate, this board, command rate tends to be kind of board dependent. Like some motherboards just can't do low command rate. This board is perfectly capable of doing 1T, even all the way up to like 4,000 megahertz. I've tested that, works absolutely great. Especially at the really high voltages that we're running, you can run 1T command rate, no problem. TWR, we're going to start off with 16. We can work that down later. TRFC, we're going to start with 300. We can work that down later. For TREFI, we're going to set 33,000. The board's going to set that lower for us, so that's nice. And that is the maximum TREFI that you can run on an X299 CPU. This is another one of those differences between X299 and mainstream Intel. Mainstream Intel, your TREFI, so like even Kaby Lake X actually. So Kaby Lake X, Kaby Lake, Skylake, Coffee Lake Refresh. All of these CPUs, they can set the TREFI to like 65,534. X299 CPUs and X99 CPUs, so the quad channel memory controllers from Intel, they max out at 32,767. These two values, we're going to start off with 4 and 12. You don't actually need to know what most of the timings to do. You can just trial and error them. So if you're wondering how I know what to set these timings to, it's basically trial and error. Lots and lots of trial and error to get these. So TCKE 8, though, if you're going to be pushing the frequency high, you might want to start with 10. TRRD, we're going to leave the tertiaries alone for now. The board can deal with those on its own. This setting right here, I really recommend you don't actually use it, because if you have a memory training problem, this will just get the board stuck in a reboot loop. Like, it's not actually going to manage to train if you enable that option. Like, that option looks like it might help you train hard settings. That option is lying to you. It will not actually do anything. It'll just get the board stuck. So don't use that. I don't know why it's in the BIOS. I've told them that it doesn't do anything. And yeah, well, I do think I've mentioned to EVGA that option is pretty much pointless. But if I haven't, well, now they know, assuming they watch this video. Anyway, down here we have on-die termination configuration. I honestly recommend that you don't mess with these. I tried messing with these. I've had zero gain. The board is better at setting these for you than you're going to be for the board. So you can just leave all of these on auto. Same goes for the RTLs. The motherboard knows how to set its own RTLs better than I do. So, and better than you will probably do too. And yeah, these timings are all basically arcane magic to me. So like, I'm just going to recommend that you just leave those on auto. The board does a perfectly good job of setting them itself, though sometimes, well, sometimes it makes sense to actually retrain the board several times because sometimes the RTLs will be set a bit too high, which is just one thing the board sometimes does. And in that case, it's good to just kind of figure out what the board on its own is capable of running. Like if you see, like just keep track of what the board sets the timings to. And if you notice that it's suddenly just loosened out the RTLs for no apparent reason, just try to set them to like what the board would try on its own. But generally, I just leave these on auto. And really, the RTLs messing up only starts being an issue once you are like at 4,000 megahertz. Like 3,600 and 3,800, I've not had any issues with them. At 4,000, they start to get a bit, like, they tend to drift around a bit. Like, I've seen them get set to, like, plus minus, like, some of them have changed by, like, four ticks a few times, and it's just like, and that does lose your performance, so it's just one of those things that, you know, generally you don't want to mess with them, because they're, like, they're a really quick way to get the board not to post, but, and the board is pretty good about setting them itself, but sometimes it screws up a bit, and you lose a bunch of performance for no apparent reason, and it's usually that. So anyway, at this point we've configured everything I really care about. Like, yeah, we have some CPU configuration stuff, like core count and all of that. We can disable virtualization because we don't use it. You know, we have options for days here. But we're not going to worry about those. We're not going to worry about boot, and we're going to save a profile. This is really important because this motherboard has 0 recovery capabilities. If you screw up and this gets stuck in a boot loop, your only way of getting this board to post is to hit the clear CMOS. And obviously that wipes your BIOS settings. So you're going to want to save profiles a lot, because if you don't, the board is just gonna, like, you're gonna end up in a situation where you're gonna be like, oh, it's not posting. And if you've just spent several hours, you know, messing with memory settings and it stops posting, you're gonna feel like a real idiot when you have to clear the CMOS and several hours of your work just vanish. You know, hopefully at that point you've probably memorized what most of your timings are at anyway, but still, you're gonna want to save profiles. Luckily, EVGA has a whole bunch of profile inputs, so let's just do, I don't know, ASDF there, so that I can then load it later. And I have a bunch of other profiles that I've been testing before. So yeah, we're going to save configuration and reset at this point. And we're going to run a bit of Geekbench, and then we're going to compare what the motherboard would do like, well, we're going to start working up the settings, and we're also going to compare what the board would do if you just leave all your sub timings auto, because that actually does cost you quite a bit of performance. Damn, we've finished setting memory settings and it's already been like 32 minutes. I'm trying to go fast here. Like, I'm really trying to go as fast as possible, and it's just like, there's a lot to cover. And the thing is, we're doing this for benchmarking, so we're not even like worried about stability, and as you can clearly see, the max mem setting has, you know, kicked in. We're at 3.1 gigabytes of memory. Also, funny thing about max mem, if you actually check your MS config at this point, you know, you have 3.1 gigs accessible, and the thing is just like, yeah, so this setting right here is very much trial and error as far as I'm aware, but generally if you start at like 8,000 or 6,000, it's going to give you just in like something between sort of 1 gig and 4 gigs of RAM, and then you can work up and down from there. Anyway, so we're just going to run our 64-bit benchmarks, and those do score better. Running the 32 bits is actually slower, so like these are completely different, well, they're not completely different, but 64 bits scores better, so that's why you run at 64 bits. Let's just run the benchmarks, and it should have no problem passing. This has passed 1,000 times before. And as you can see, it is getting very, very hot. We will eventually probably hit about 100 degrees once we get to DFFT, so yeah, that's why you run liquid metal and not thermal paste. The thing is, liquid metal screws up the IHS, and I don't have a spare IHS to use for LN2, so it's like, liquid metal leaves a whole bunch of residue on the IHS. And it's fine if you just keep using liquid metal, it's not a problem. If you go back and forth between liquid metal and thermal paste, I think it's less than ideal. So that's why it's currently on thermal paste. And I'll probably get, like, if I get myself a spare IHS, then I'll start running this thing on liquid metal. And here comes Hellfire. Yeah, so you can see it gets really hot at this point. And it's actually not that bad. I guess the room temperature is a bit lower than when I was testing this last time. And we've got a nice score of 57,000 points multi-core with 659. So that's nice. We've got 9,000 points memory score, so we're just going to save that. And obviously this isn't really a fair comparison because we cranked up the mesh frequency, we cranked up the memory frequency, we changed all the timings. So compared to stock, yeah, of course we're going to have a ginormous improvement in performance. But still, now we're going to work it up a bit and see if we can't go any faster. It would be really nice if this motherboard had more voltage range, because on the X299 Dark, I've actually managed to push a 7940X all the way to like 10,000 points memory score. And with this board, just because the voltage, like, you can't set more than 1.84 volts, yeah, I've not actually managed to go that high. So next we're just going to skip straight to 3800, and we're going to tighten down the timings to like best possible that I know will run on this. Like basically what one of my profiles for this sets. So yeah, 4, 6. Actually, we can drop that all the way down to 4 on that. TCWL9. Actually, let's put that at 5 for now. I actually want this to pass. 12, 240. That's maxed out. We can try that at 11.3. 8. And then we're going to go 2, 3, 4, 4. 4, 4. We don't need to worry about these because they're for dual rank memory sticks, and we're not running dual rank memory sticks. So we don't need to worry about those. And here we're going to do 4, 6, and wait, 4. Oh, I've screwed it up. 6, like that. And at this point, and actually let's check the RTLs so we can see that we have 51.11.8, 53.11.8, and this is for 3600 CL12, right? And this will keep, I think the board keeps the same RTLs up to 3800, and then once you go up to 4000, the RTLs loosen out. So generally, I wouldn't recommend running 4000, just because your RTLs just get screwed up, and you lose a bunch of performance to these getting looser. And the other thing is your RTLs are also tied to your cast latency. So right now we're at CL12. If we went from CL12 to CL13, the RTLs would get worse again. So yeah, basically, and I can't run, because of the voltage limitations on this motherboard, I can't actually run this at like 4000 megahertz CL12. So yeah, that's kind of the issues. And that's also true for me on the X299 Dark because my memory sticks don't like high VTT DDR, and the VTT DDR voltage controllers on both the X299 Dark and the X299 Micro 2 are fixed. You can't control them through software. So that kind of sucks, but it is what it is. So we're going to save configuration and reset at this point, and hopefully this posts. Yeah, great. So we're just going to hop in and check that the RTLs didn't actually loosen out. And then we will do a test at 4000 just to show you why it's like not worth trying to bench at the highest possible frequency. Because if you actually leave all your sub-timings auto, then benching 4000 CL13 actually works just fine. But if you're setting up everything manually and then you go to 4000 CL13, then everything goes to hell. So yeah, you can see our RTLs didn't change going from 3600 to 3800. So everything is good. But if we went from 3800 to 4000 CL13, all of those RTLs are going to get looser and we're going to lose performance, even if we keep all of our sub-timings the same, which I don't think we even can. So that's kind of an issue. So now we're going to go into Windows. And we should be getting about like 9,600 points memory. So yeah, also if you have like a good memory kit, running like memory settings like this, it helps you for like, I'm using Geekbench here, but this is a good way to pick up a couple thousand points in literally just like 3D Mark physics. You can pick up a couple, well, quite a few points just setting up your memory properly. 3D Mark, like, and by that I mean like 3D Mark Vantage physics, 3D Mark 11 physics, 3D Mark Firestrike physics, 3D Mark Time Spy physics, 3D Mark Time Spy Extreme physics. All of these benefit from setting up your memory properly. If you don't, like, you can easily pick up, like, say for Firestrike, you regularly will pick up like 1,000 or 2,000 points with a 7940X. So you'll go from like 33,000 points physics to like 35,000 points physics, which is you know, that's a nice boost, because a lot of people, like, especially if you're going up on like if you're competing, right? A lot of guys will just run like XMP or something on like a 7980XE, and you know, you can often get really, really like close to people running 7980XEs with terrible memory settings by just, you know, hammering your memory, and you don't necessarily like it at that point. You know, you can make up for your lower core count basically by just hammering the memory settings. Obviously, if you're at the very top level, right, going up against like people with 79, like, you know, if you're competing for like world records, well, at that point you're going up against guys who have a 7980XE and really good memory settings as well. So at that point, it's just a case of trying to keep up at all, right? Because you're just not going to be competitive if your memory settings suck and you're going up against somebody who's don't. So, yeah. And the same thing applies to Geekbench 3. Right, because Geekbench 3 is a ranking on HWBot. Cinebench, though, is one of those benchmarks that doesn't really care about RAM. But Geekbench 3, 3D Marks, what else? There's a few benchmarks. Oh, yeah, what was it, the H.264 or H.265 benchmark? The video encoding one, that one's apparently pretty memory heavy. I don't run it very much because it's AVX and really hot, so I'm not a big fan of it. We might actually crash on Dijkstra, I'm not 100% certain, but these memory settings have worked for me in the past, so if we're lucky, yeah. Dijkstra did not like the memory settings, so we're going to have to go fix those. Actually, you know what, I'm just going to load up one of the profiles that works. That's going to be easier. Because they're 4.5 gigahertz anyway, they're all 3200 cache too, and it's just going to do all the timings for me. This is why we have profiles, right? So we're going to use a profile, we're going to use my 3812, and yeah, okay, so I set that to 5, so that's a difference. I didn't change that. These are the same, this is lower, this is, whoa, that is low. Oh no, this is higher, that's lower. That's lower. These are the same. Let's see. And I think this one has, yeah, okay, so this is the one that I was messing around with the PLL trims. Though I'm not sure how necessary those are. And also it's running a bit more on-core voltage offset. It's running a different VCCSA, but that doesn't make a difference. And it is running a bit more target voltage. But we should be fine. Other than that, like, there's really not that many differences. So, yeah, I screwed up some of the timings. This is why you have profiles. There's also a 4000, I also have like a 4000 CL13 profile, and we're going to load that up and just see how it actually loses performance, because the funny thing is, if you just test frequency-wise, the performance loss from going from like 3800 CL12 to 4000 CL13, you actually gain performance doing that. But it's like, if you have all your sub-timing set up, then the RTLs actually kill you. So, yeah, that's why with this board, I'd max out at 3800. I'm not sure, like, I've not managed to get the dark to do 4000 either, so, and I've not tested the same differences there. On the dark as well, I run the 38x multiplier with CL12, so generally on the dark I bench like 3900 CL12. So, you know, like 100 megahertz more than this, just because the dark actually has proper full voltage control on the DIMMs. Anyway, let's run this. And if I remember correctly, this profile is a little bit less than reliable, as in it sometimes passes, it sometimes doesn't, and I think it also ran with less max mem. So this one I think is set up for like 2.5 gigs instead of 3.1, but it should like, hopefully it'll pass. We'll see. We shall see very shortly. Here comes Dijkstra. And Dijkstra has approved? You've got to be kidding me. If that ran for one more second, we'd be good. Okay, you know what? We're just gonna MS-config our way to stability. So we're gonna do 550. I mean 5500. Nope. Oops, I pressed cancel, so MS. So right now the system is horrifically unstable, as you can probably guess, but that doesn't prevent us from doing minor things. Fly, okay, restart. And at this point it should pass. It really, really should pass at this point. Also, if you're, if you want to help your memory overclocking a bit more, Samsung BDI generally runs best around 20 degrees Celsius. So at this point, like, these are actually noticeably warmer than room temperature. That's not helping the stability. So putting a fan on them would actually probably help, but I can't be bothered right now to dig up a fan and stick it on top of that. So let's run. If we're lucky, it'll pass. Sometimes you can also just brute force your way through Dijkstra, as in you just run it like you try to run it a bunch of times with a bunch of restarts, and sometimes it'll pass if you're lucky. Of course, if it crashes right as the test starts, then very unlikely that you're going to be able to brute force it, because you know, the longer you can go through the test before it crashes, the more stable you might be. Right, and if you just crash immediately as soon as it starts, then it's like, yeah, okay, you probably want to give up at that point. But we're like, this should finish, yeah, like we're like 2 seconds away from that test finishing, so I'm gonna tweak one or two things and we should be good. I have a rough idea of what's probably causing it. I mean, part of it's going to be the temperatures. Those sticks are actually warm. But, like, they're not hot, they're just, like, you know, warm. Noticeably warm. So they're probably in, like, 30, 35, 36, something like that. And if we got them 15 degrees cooler, they might run a bit better, but, yeah. So we're just going to loosen that out again, and this out. See, this might be unnecessary there. And this might be a bit low. At this point, it should pass. And we should still get about 9,600. I really like how, like, one thing I've noticed that I like about this board is how reliable it is with posting. Like, it doesn't tend to fail to post. Like, a lot of other board, I guess I'm just having Asus flashbacks, but Asus boards are just horrendous about running hard memory settings. Like, they can do it. It's just like getting them to do it is a massive pain in the ass. So, yeah, let's run, and hopefully, with less memory and slightly looser timings, we will finally make it through that test, if we're lucky. I should have put the fan on it. I should open a window and put a fan on it. That's how the progression starts. First you open the window, then you stick the radiator out the window, then you dunk the radiator in an ice bucket. Then you just get rid of the radiator and run Sub-Zero directly. Okay, so obviously I've screwed something up. I think really the memory is just getting too warm. It's almost certainly the issue. Let's just throw a fan on there. And where's my sketchy fan extension? Well, I did want... There. I ideally want to hit both both sets of memory, which is not gonna happen. Yeah, that fan keeps running away. Okay, that's good enough. We'll call that a day. It's going to take a while for these memory sticks to cool down, though. The heat sinks on them are a bit heavy. It won't stop me from trying again. I just realized that fan looks like it's turning really slowly in the camera. But it's hooked up to straight 12 volts and not on PWM or anything, so it's maxed out. See, the fan trick works. Oh no, yeah, it works. I didn't actually expect that to work. It actually might be just random luck at this point. You'd probably have to repeat this test like a few hundred times before you would be like, yeah, lowering the running temperature of the memory by, I don't know, 2 degrees or something, because that fan's not been there that long, actually makes a difference, but still. Yeah, we even made it through DFFT, so now it's just going to be smooth sailing. And we're getting almost 9,600, yeah. So 9,570. That's good enough for me, and we're getting almost 58,159 points, so that's pretty good. I think the highest I've seen so far on this system, actually I have a bunch of screenshots from earlier tests, so just go through them. I think, yeah, this was one of the early ones, so we can see this one's 9,000, and this one was like not super tight. And then we have the 9,606 here, and I screwed up the screenshot. Yeah, so you can see 12, 11, 11, 24. I think for that one I did actually have the fan on there. So yeah, so that's pretty good. Then we have a bunch of, that's a different board. That's a different board, I think. Oh yeah, that's all the testing I've done so far. So yeah, but we're roughly where I wanted to be, and now we're gonna get rid of all my special subtimings. Like, what if you just set your cast latency TRCD, TRP, and TRAS? Like, what would happen then, right? You're gonna lose like 1,000 points. Spoilers. Now, luckily we have profiles, so I don't need to worry about that too much. Yeah, if we just go through, we're just gonna, so on EVGA motherboards, you can't type in A into your fields. You have to type in 0 if you want to set them to auto. And you can't do this on an ASRock motherboard. There. Because ASRock's BIOS requires you to double tap the down arrow before the input gets confirmed. It's not training? Really? That's new. How are you not training? That should train. Come on. Nope, won't train. Okay, well, that's what we have clear CMOS for, don't we? So that's unfortunate, but we're still going to do that test. For some reason, this board needs to, well, actually a lot of boards have like a false start after you clear the BIOS, so. Like a lot of recent boards. I don't think my older boards did that. I'm actually not sure. Anyway, let's go to the BIOS again. Load up a profile. I should have one that's like safe. I think it's that one. Is it? No, it isn't. Okay, but we're gonna try. And oh yeah, this was before I figured out that the voltage regulator is soft capped, so let's try that. And then just go 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. I must have screwed something up when I was doing the zeros. I'm not seeing what though. There. And just in case, I'm gonna use 3600. We're just gonna train at 3600 to make sure everything is working properly. Yeah, this is all set up the right way. Oh, it must have been, might have been the PLL offsets. Well, whatever. Yeah, see, now it trains. I really didn't plan for this video to be an hour. I was like, it'll be a quick video. RAM overclocking in 30 minutes. Trying to condense, you know, several hours worth of testing into less than an hour of work probably wasn't the best idea I had. Open Geekbench. Okay, finally. Run. At least we know this should pass. Because it's on auto settings and they're just terrible. Like, they're absolutely god-awful. Unfortunately, I've not been able to get ASRock timing configurator to work on this motherboard. So we can't actually check the subtimings in Windows. You know what, I think I'll just cut it short here with, we're just not going to bother testing with 4000 CL13. Just because it's not worth it. Also, I guess it's worth noting that, like, overclocking for daily settings is not that different. You just use a lot less voltage, and you actually, like, run proper stress tests, not just a benchmark and, you know, focus all on the score. So yeah, and you can see, like, we've lost a ton of points, right, just to memory timings. Like, there. That's why you set your subtimings. Because we're at 3800 CL12, aren't we? Or we're at 3600. CPU Z, come here. Okay, so we're at 3600 right now, but we've already lost a ton of points, and I don't think like running it at 3800 is going to make a whole lot of difference. I mean, even I'm pretty sure I saved, like, we had 9,000. Yeah, we had 9,000 points at 3600 as well, and this was like 8,000 points. So that's like 1.6 thousand points against the 3800 test. So yeah, you want to set your subtimings, because if you don't set your subtimings, they look like complete garbage. Like, we're running 7, 7, 14, right? Like, I was running that at 4 instead of 7. T-Fall is just through the bloody roof. Like, you know, just, yeah, we're just going to spend forever on that operation. TCL is just way off as well. TCWL here is just completely, like, way off as well. Like, way high for no reason. Command rate is up. You know, TWR is not is basically twice as high. TRFC more than twice as long. TREFI half the size. So actually TREFI is interesting because that's the interval between TRFCs, right? So basically, your goal with TREFI and TRFC is to minimize the amount of time you spend doing your time of refresh, right? So you want to minimize your refresh cycle time, and well, minimize the amount of time you spend refreshing your memory, right? Like, you want to refresh as rarely as possible, as quickly as possible. So cranking TRFC down reduces how long the refresh cycle takes. Cranking TREFI up reduces how frequently the TRFC is done, right? So that's why you crank TREFI all the way up to 32,000, and why having it at 14,000 costs you performance. And then, yeah, these are up a bit. They're not that much higher. TCKE is a bit higher. Yeah, so you can clearly see how, and the tertiaries are actually not that different. The cast to cast delays are a bit higher, but ultimately, like, the tertiaries are not really changed in any way, shape, or form. So yeah, that's memory overclocking on the X299 Micro 2. And the cool thing is you can actually copy everything I've done on here with this board, and you can transfer it to the X299 Dark, and it works exactly the same, except on the X299 Dark, when you punch in 2 volts, you actually get 2 volts. And also, the X299 Dark has an extreme overclocking BIOS, where if you punch in 2.3 volts, you get 2.3 volts, which is way too much. Okay, like that is a ton of voltage But like 2.1 volts, you know, you can bench that on a lot of sticks, or 2.15. A lot of sticks will take that just fine. So, though obviously once you start going past 1.8 volts, you know, it's pretty high risk. And I think most sticks will probably, like most good memory kits will do at least like the 3800 CL12 at 1.85 volts just fine. And at that point, you're going to have like 90% of the performance. Of course, you know, if you're competing, then plus 5% more score is plus 5% more score above your, you know, that gets you first place. That can be easily the difference between first and second, or second and third. So, or even plus 1% performance, right? Like that already is also worth bothering with, just to get first place. But yeah, so this board's pretty good at memory overclocking, except for the fact that the voltage settings don't quite work the way they should. There's also like VTT DDR is not controllable, VPP is not controllable, but other than that, it's actually really, really easy to work on. I rather like the BIOS because it is like it's pretty quick. Like I can set up an overclock on this really, really quick. That's why I like it. The memory overclocking is actually good, like really good. There's a lot of motherboards out there where you try to do 3600 CL12 cold and it's just not going to work at all. Like it's just not going to post. So yeah, that is it for the video. Pretty good board for memory overclocking. The dark is obviously better, mostly because the dark has proper voltage full voltage control. And also it is worth noting that this motherboard will not run Kaby Lake X CPUs. Like I found that out the hard way because I stuck my 7740X in it and it didn't post, and I've like spent like a lot of time trying to figure out why it wasn't posting until it dawned on me that, hey, maybe it doesn't run Kaby Lake X CPUs. Well, it turns out it doesn't. So, yeah, that is it for the video. Thank you for watching. Like, share, subscribe, leave any comments, questions, suggestions down in the comment section below. And if you'd like to support what I do here with actually hardcore overclocking, then I have a Patreon and t-shirts you can buy. You can find a link to all of that down in the description below. And yeah, huge thanks to the Patreons and the people who buy the shirts and all of that for the 7940X, because I did have to buy that chip. Thanks to EVGA for sending the motherboard and the PSU. And that is it for the video at this point. Goodbye. I'm going to go hit the stop button. Which mouse? Oh, this one. See ya.